My son secretly quit law school and used the money I sent him to fund a nightlife business. Now he expects me to rescue him again. I gave up nearly everything to help my son Ethan earn a law degree in Chicago. I sold an old cabin, emptied most of my retirement account, accepted the penalties, and worked extra weekend shifts at a clinic. I even moved from my two-bedroom townhouse into a cramped studio so Ethan could study without worrying. Every month, I transferred $4,800. It was supposed to cover tuition, rent near campus, textbooks, groceries, and other expenses. Ethan promised that once he became an attorney, he would make sure I never struggled again. He called me the reason he would succeed. He sent photos from lecture halls and described professors and mock trials. For almost 3 years, I believed every word. I had sent him more than $170,000 when the truth reached me by accident. I was waiting in line at a pharmacy when I recognized the mother of one of Ethan's old friends. During our conversation, she mentioned how impressed she was that Ethan and her son Caleb had managed to grow their event production company so quickly. I asked what company she meant. She hesitated, then said Caleb had shared an apartment with Ethan for nearly 3 years. Together, they organized rooftop parties, rented sound systems, and booked DJs for clubs across the city. Ethan had told me he lived alone because roommates would distract him from school. That evening, I called the university. A woman in the registrar's office confirmed that Ethan had withdrawn after his first semester. He had failed 2 major exams and never returned. The school had mailed several notices to his permanent address, my address, but I had never seen them. Suddenly, all the times Ethan insisted on collecting my mail while visiting made sense. I drove to the address Caleb's mother gave me. It was not the modest apartment near campus that Ethan claimed to rent. It was a renovated loft in the West Loop with floor-to-ceiling windows, designer furniture, lighting rigs, speakers, turntables, and a glass recording booth. 3 young men were drinking in the kitchen while music shook the walls. Ethan stood behind a mixing console. When he noticed me, he did not look frightened or ashamed. He looked openly irritated. Then I asked him when he had planned to tell me about law school. He lowered the music and said law had never suited him. Too many rules, too much reading, too many people telling him what success was supposed to look like. He had discovered that his real talent was producing events and building artists. I asked where my money had gone. He said I was looking at it. The equipment, the loft, the parties, the travel, the connections. He called all of it an investment. According to him, I had not lost anything. I had simply funded a different education, one that mattered more than a diploma. When I reminded him that he had lied to me every month, he rolled his eyes.
I told Ethan that an investment requires consent. I had agreed to pay for law school, not champagne, lighting systems, and weekend trips disguised as networking. He laughed and said I was being dramatic. Parents support their children all the time. Some pay for sports, others pay for businesses. I had paid for his future, and its exact shape was none of my concern. Caleb stood near the kitchen counter, staring at the floor. One roommate nodded as though Ethan's explanation made sense. Another told me I should be proud because their company had booked events in Milwaukee and Detroit. I asked how much the business had earned. He said revenue was not the point. They were building momentum. After several minutes, he admitted they had made about $28,000 the previous year, less than 1/5 of what I had given him. When I began crying, he accused me of using guilt to control him. He said my sacrifices had been my choice, and he had never forced me to sell anything. Then he turned the music back up, as if the conversation was finished. I left silently. For 12 days, Ethan did not call, apologize, or ask whether I was all right. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I remembered the photos he had sent me in borrowed suits, the stories about courtroom exercises, and the proud smile on his face when he called me his greatest supporter. On Tuesday, my phone rang. Ethan sounded cheerful. He said he had incredible news. A promoter from Nashville wanted to help them launch a touring event brand. They could expand into 3 cities, hire staff, and open a studio. It was the opportunity that would finally make everything worthwhile. He needed $60,000. I thought he was joking. He was not. Ethan explained that since I had already contributed so much, walking away now made no sense. One final investment would protect everything I had put in. He promised that once the company became profitable, he would repay me with interest. I asked whether he understood that he had stolen from me. His voice hardened. He said stealing was taking money without permission. I had transferred it willingly. According to him, the problem was that I had attached expectations he never accepted. That was another lie. We discussed tuition and living expenses monthly. I told him I needed time to think. He said there was no time. The promoter was speaking with other partners, and the offer would disappear by Friday. Then his tone softened. He called me Mom, the way he used to when he was a child and wanted something. He said we were a team. None of his success would exist without me. That part was true. Without me, he would have needed a job. I asked him to come to my apartment the next evening and present a proposal. He brightened. He said he would bring projections, contracts, and a repayment schedule. After we hung up, I called my oldest friend, Denise. She listened while I told her everything. Then she gave me the number of an attorney named Marcus Reed.
Marcus Reed's office was above a bookstore in downtown Evanston. He was calm, precise. I told him everything. The acceptance letter, monthly transfers, intercepted mail, false photos, the loft, and Ethan's request for another $60,000. Marcus took notes, asked for dates, and requested every bank statement, message, email, and photograph I had. When I finished, he leaned back and said the word I had been avoiding: fraud. He explained that being my son did not protect Ethan from deliberate deception. If Ethan had knowingly lied to obtain money, the family relationship changed nothing. I asked whether I could recover all of it. Marcus was honest. Recovering the full amount would be difficult and slow. Ethan might not have enough assets. But we could create pressure, preserve evidence, and make him understand that I was no longer willing to be manipulated. We spent 2 hours building a record. Marcus printed a demand letter ordering Ethan to stop contacting me for money. He helped me prepare a spreadsheet listing every transfer, date, amount, and stated purpose. He also drafted a civil claim for the maximum amount allowed in small claims court. Before I left, he told me not to warn Ethan. "Let him believe the meeting is about his proposal," Marcus said. People reveal the most when they think they are still in control. The following evening, Ethan arrived 20 minutes late in a white Mercedes SUV. He said it was leased because image mattered when meeting clients. He wore Ida Zott and carried a leather portfolio. Inside my apartment, he spread documents across the table like an investor. He showed me charts of social media growth, ticket sales, sponsorship estimates, and cities they hoped to enter. According to his projections, my $60,000 could become $180,000 within 18 months. I asked where my name appeared in the contracts. He said it was better if it did not. Too many signatures would complicate taxes and registration. I would be a silent partner based on trust. Trust. He spoke for an hour. He described his vision, instinct, and the destiny he believed had guided him. He said the universe had redirected him from law school because he was meant to create something bigger. My support, he claimed, proved I believed in him before anyone else did. When he finished, he smiled and held out a pen. Instead, I placed a sealed envelope on the table. Ethan's smile remained for a second. Then he opened it. The first page was Marcus's demand letter. The second was the spreadsheet documenting $171,600 in transfers. The third was the court filing. He read each page twice. The confidence disappeared from his face. "What is this?" he asked. I told him it was my answer. He laughed, but the sound came out thin and nervous. He said no judge would take a mother suing her own son seriously. I told him Marcus had reviewed the evidence. Ethan's fingers tightened around the papers. Then his expression changed. His eyes filled with tears.
The tears came. Ethan lowered his head, covered his face, and said he could not believe I was doing this to him. Parents were supposed to help their children recover from mistakes, not punish them forever. I watched him. Years earlier, he had cried the same way when he showed me the forged acceptance letter. The same broken breathing, the same trembling shoulders, the same wounded expression meant to make me comfort him. This time, I stayed in my chair. When I did not move, the tears stopped. His face hardened. He shoved back from the table, and the chair scraped across the floor. He said that if I continued with the case, I would never see him again. No birthdays, holidays, or calls. I would lose my only child over money. I stood and told him I had lost my son 3 years earlier, when he decided that lying to me was easier than respecting me. He followed me toward the door, shouting that I was destroying his future. The lawsuit would damage his credit and ruin the company.
Doors opened. Caleb and two roommates stepped into the hallway. One, a quiet man named Noah, looked confused. He asked Ethan why I was talking about law school. Ethan told him to stay out of it. Noah said Ethan had always claimed the money came from a family trust. Caleb nodded. Neither knew I was working extra shifts to send it. Ethan ordered them back to their rooms. They did not move. I picked up my coat, told Ethan all future communication would go through Marcus, and walked out. My hands shook so badly that I dropped my keys twice. I sat in my car, breathing until the dizziness passed. Beneath the fear was something unfamiliar, relief. For the first time, I had said no and meant it. I called Denise. She answered immediately. When I told her I had handed Ethan the papers, she began crying. She said she was proud of me and reminded me that protecting myself did not make me cruel. The next morning, Ethan sent 23 messages. The first were apologies. He said he had panicked and never meant to hurt me. Then came promises. He would repay everything once the company succeeded. When I did not answer, the messages turned hostile. He accused me of being selfish, vindictive, and jealous. A real mother, he said, would love her child unconditionally. He warned me that everyone would learn what kind of person I was. I took screenshots and forwarded every message to Marcus. He called less than an hour later. "This is useful," he said. "Do not respond." Marcus explained that the messages showed a pattern: affection when Ethan wanted something, threats when affection failed. Combined with the false school records and intercepted mail, they supported intentional deception. He warned me that small claims court could recover only $12,500. The filing created a record, forced Ethan to respond, and opened a door to a larger civil case. Then Marcus asked an unexpected question. "Do you know exactly what he bought with your money?" I realized that I did not.
Marcus asked me to gather every receipt, transfer record, email, and photo connected to Ethan's business. I spent 2 evenings sorting 3 years of lies. The numbers became harder to ignore once organized. There were payments marked spring tuition and legal research materials. There were emergency transfers for a broken laptop, a seminar, and an internship apartment deposit. Every explanation had sounded reasonable. Now I knew none of it was real. 2 days later, Marcus called. Noah had contacted him after finding the attorney's name on the papers Ethan left in the loft. He wanted to speak with me privately. We met at a cafe near Northwestern University. Noah was waiting at a corner table with a folder. He stood when I approached and apologized before I sat down. He said Ethan told everyone the startup money came from a trust. Noah believed Ethan had family wealth and never questioned the equipment, trips, or rent. Then he pushed the folder toward me. Inside were bank statements, invoices, leases, and expense reports. Noah had printed everything he could access before Ethan removed him from the company accounts. He walked me through the records. Nearly $96,000 had gone towards speakers, turntables, lighting rigs, and recording equipment. Another $38,000 covered the loft, furniture, and leased Mercedes. More than $25,000 paid for flights, hotels, festivals, VIP passes, and restaurants in several cities. Ethan labeled most trips industry development. Noah admitted they usually attended one networking event, then spent the weekend partying. I asked about revenue. The company had earned only $34,000 over 3 years. Most events barely covered security, transportation, and venue fees. Some lost money. The Nashville promoter was not offering a partnership. He had replied to 2 emails. There was no contract, tour, or investment opportunity. Noah said exaggeration was Ethan's greatest talent. A returned message became a partnership. A small booking became a regional expansion. A compliment became a guaranteed deal. He made people believe success was always one payment away. I asked why Noah was helping me. He said his mother had worked 2 jobs while raising him. If someone took her savings this way, he would want the truth exposed. He had decided to leave the business. Noah offered to testify and gave me copies of everything. I drove directly to Marcus's office. He spread the documents across his table and compared dates with my transfers. Several purchases occurred within hours of money reaching Ethan's account. A transfer for bar exam preparation paid for a custom lighting wall. Money for textbooks covered 4 tickets to Miami. The fictional internship deposit became the down payment on the Mercedes lease. Marcus circled each connection in red ink. "This is no longer your word against his," he said. "We can trace the deception dollar by dollar." For the first time since learning the truth, I saw him smile again.
Marcus filed an amended claim the next morning. He included Noah's records, the university's withdrawal confirmation, copies of Ethan's messages, and the staged photographs Ethan used to pose as a student. He said the new evidence made it harder for Ethan to describe the situation as a misunderstanding. The pattern was too deliberate. Every lie had a purpose, and every purpose led back to money. That afternoon, Denise gave me the name of a financial advisor named Laura Bennett. She specialized in helping people recover after major financial losses, especially family fraud. Laura's office was small and quiet, with framed certificates on one wall and photographs of her grandchildren beside the computer. She asked me to bring everything: retirement statements, tax returns, the cabin sale documents, bank records, and proof of the extra shifts I had worked. I arrived with 2 boxes. Laura spent hours reviewing the numbers. She rarely reacted, but her jaw tightened as she entered each amount into a spreadsheet. Finally, she turned the monitor toward me. The direct transfers to Ethan totaled $171,600. With penalties and taxes from withdrawing my retirement money early, the immediate loss exceeded $205,000. Then she added what I had never allowed myself to consider. If the retirement funds had remained invested, they could have grown by more than $80,000 within a decade. The cabin I sold had increased sharply in value. Based on recent sales in the area, I had lost another $120,000 in potential equity and rental income. Laura included reduced retirement contributions, lost compound growth, and the medical costs connected to years of exhaustion from working extra shifts. The total projected damage was $418,000. I stared at the number. Laura explained that I might need to work 8 or 9 years longer than planned. My retirement would no longer be comfortable. It could still be stable, but only with strict budgeting and a careful rebuilding strategy. She printed a summary and placed it in front of me. On paper, the loss looked even more final. Every weekend shift, every night I came home with swollen feet, every meal I skipped because I was too tired to cook, every time I told myself the sacrifice would be worth it when Ethan became an attorney, all of it had been converted into a number on a page. I started crying. Not loudly. I simply sat there while tears fell onto the printed spreadsheet. It was the first time I had truly let myself grieve. Until then, I had been too busy gathering evidence, speaking with Marcus, and prepared to fight. Sitting in Laura's office made me understand that Ethan had not only taken money, he had taken years. Laura moved a box of tissues toward me and waited. She did not tell me to calm down or search for something positive. She simply gave me time. When I could finally speak, I asked whether recovery was possible. She said yes, but it would require boundaries stronger than any I had ever set before.
Laura helped me create a list of immediate protections. I opened a new bank account, changed every password, froze my credit, and removed Ethan as an emergency contact on all financial documents. She also gave me information about support groups for parents who had been financially exploited by adult children. I hated the phrase at first. It sounded clinical and humiliating, as if my life had become a cautionary brochure. But Laura said shame keeps people silent, and silence protects the person who caused the harm. We scheduled another meeting for 2 weeks later. Before I left, she looked at the boxes of records beside my chair and told me something I had not expected to hear. "You were not foolish," she said. "You trusted your son. He built an entire system to abuse that trust." 3 days later, Marcus called while I was finishing a shift at the clinic. He said Ethan's lawyer had contacted him. They denied fraud and claimed every payment had been a voluntary gift. Then Marcus mentioned something else. A man named Richard Hale had called his office asking how to reach me. Richard was Ethan's father. We had not spoken in 14 years. After our divorce, Richard moved to Colorado, remarried, and created a new life. He paid child support, but visits became rare, then stopped. Ethan was 11 the last time his father attended a birthday party. I told Marcus he could give Richard my number. The call came that evening. Richard's voice sounded older, but familiar. He said Ethan had contacted him asking for $25,000 to save the event company. Before sending anything, Richard had searched online and discovered the lawsuit. He wanted my side of the story. I told him everything. He remained silent while I described the fake law school, the intercepted letters, the monthly transfers, the luxury loft, and the evidence Noah provided. When I finished, Richard let out a long breath. Then he admitted Ethan had lied to him before. 5 years earlier, Ethan claimed he had been accepted into an international summer program in London. Richard sent him $9,000 for tuition and travel. Months later, he discovered photographs showing Ethan at a music festival in Spain. There had been no academic program. I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. I asked why he had never warned me. Richard said he was ashamed. He believed it was a single reckless mistake and feared that telling me would make Ethan hate him permanently. So he demanded an apology, refused further requests, and stayed silent. His silence had cost me everything. Richard apologized. Then he offered $7,500 toward my legal fees. He said it would not repair the damage, but he wanted to take responsibility for failing to speak sooner. I told him I needed time. After we hung up, I called Denise. She listened, then said Richard should have warned me years ago. Accepting his help was not forgiveness. It was accountability. The next morning, I called him back. I accepted the money.
Richard transferred the money that afternoon and sent a short email saying he wished he had spoken sooner. I forwarded the receipt to Marcus and used the funds for the case. Days later, Marcus called with news. He had sent Ethan's lawyer the university records, Noah's documents, the messages, and proof that Ethan intercepted mail from my address. The lawyer requested mediation the next day. Marcus said that was a good sign. They know a trial could become dangerous, he explained. Civil liability is one problem. Intentional deception could lead to criminal charges. Part of me wanted a courtroom. I imagined Ethan standing before a judge while every lie was read aloud. I wanted someone with authority to tell him that what he had done was not ambition, fear, or confusion. It was theft. But Marcus warned me that trials were expensive, slow, and unpredictable. Even if I won, collecting a judgment could take years. Mediation could create an enforceable payment plan and force him to admit what he had done. I agreed. The session was scheduled for 4 weeks later. Marcus asked me to write down what I wanted beyond money. I stared at a blank page. Eventually, I made 3 demands. First, Ethan had to acknowledge in writing that he obtained my money through deliberate lies. Second, he had to sell the equipment bought with my transfers and make an immediate payment. Third, he had to follow a long-term repayment schedule with consequences for missed payments. I did not expect to recover everything. Ethan had already spent too much. But I needed the agreement to make the truth permanent. Denise read my list and suggested I speak with a therapist before mediation. She gave me the name of Dr. Miriam Cole, who worked with family betrayal and financial abuse. Miriam's office was near the lake, inside an old brick building. She was younger than I expected and spoke with unsettling directness. She asked what hurt most. I began to say the money. Then I stopped. The money terrified me. Losing retirement security felt like losing the ground beneath my feet. But the deeper wound was knowing Ethan had looked into my eyes for 3 years and lied without hesitation. He had called me his hero while spending my savings. He had listened as I complained about aching knees after double shifts and still asked for more. He had watched me become poorer so he could pretend to be successful. Miriam said I was grieving 2 losses at once, the future I had built and the son I believed I knew. That sentence broke something open inside me. I told her I kept wondering what I had done wrong as a mother. She answered that trusting my child was not a failure. Ethan's decision to exploit that love belonged to him alone. By the end of the session, I felt exhausted but clearer. Miriam scheduled weekly appointments until mediation. She said our goal was not to repair Ethan or force forgiveness. It was to help me enter that room without surrendering myself again. In our second session, Miriam asked what justice would look like if Ethan never changed. I considered the question. Part of me still imagined the boy who once left handmade cards on my pillow and waited for me to read them. I did not want him homeless or ruined, but I could not confuse love with permission anymore. I told Miriam I wanted Ethan to face consequences long enough to understand that apologies without action meant nothing. I wanted repayment, written acknowledgement, and proof that he could follow rules he had spent years avoiding. She asked whether I believed he was capable of real change. I said I did not know. Maybe losing Noah, facing court, and seeing the evidence had finally broken through his confidence. Or maybe he was simply searching for another act to save himself. Miriam reminded me that mediation was not a test of Ethan's soul. It was a legal process designed to protect me. Whether he became better afterward was his responsibility. 2 nights before mediation, Denise came over with Thai food and a notebook. We sat at my kitchen table and practiced Ethan's likely tactics. She pretended to cry. She accused me of abandoning him. She promised future payments without dates or details. She said I had pressured him to become a lawyer and that his lies were my fault. Each time I answered with the same sentence. We are here to discuss documented fraud and enforceable repayment. At first, my voice shook. After an hour, it did not. Denise told me I owed Ethan neither forgiveness nor access to my life. Boundaries were not revenge, they were the price of being safe. The mediation took place in a building near the Chicago River. Marcus met me in the lobby with a thick folder. Inside were bank statements, photos, school records, invoices, Ethan's messages, and Noah's signed statement. The conference room had a long table overlooking gray water and still bridges. A mediator named Helen Park arrived first. She explained that both sides would speak, negotiate, and seek an agreement before trial. Ethan's lawyer entered next. Ethan came last. He wore a simple navy suit instead of designer clothing. His hair was neatly combed, with dark circles beneath his eyes. He looked smaller without the loft, the music, and his friends around him. He sat across from me and stared at his hands. Helen asked him to speak first. Ethan cleared his throat and delivered what sounded like a prepared apology. He said law school overwhelmed him. He panicked after failing and was afraid to disappoint me. What followed, he claimed, was a series of immature decisions made by a frightened young man. He never said fraud. He never said theft. He never mentioned the intercepted letters, the staged photographs, or 3 years of lies. When he finished, his lawyer said Ethan accepted responsibility for poor communication. Marcus glanced at me but said nothing. Then Helen asked me to speak. I unfolded the statement Miriam had helped me prepare.
I read slowly, refusing to look away from Ethan. I described the weekend shifts at the clinic, the swollen ankles, and the nights I ate toast because every extra dollar was meant for his education. I described selling the cabin my parents left me and paying penalties to empty my retirement account. I described how proud I had been. Then I described the lies. The fake class schedules, the staged photographs in borrowed lecture halls, the stories about professors who did not exist, the envelopes taken from my mailbox before I could open them. I explained that Ethan had watched me sacrifice my health and security while he lived in a luxury loft, leased an expensive car, and traveled to festivals with money marked for tuition. When I reached the final page, my hands were shaking. I said the direct loss was $171,600, but the real damage was far greater. I would work years longer than planned. The retirement I had spent decades building was gone. My ability to trust my own judgment had been damaged along with my finances. When I finished, the room went silent. Helen looked at Ethan. "Do you understand what your actions did to your mother?" His lawyer began to answer, but Helen raised one hand. I asked Ethan. Ethan stared at the table. After a pause, he whispered that he understood. Helen asked him to explain what he understood. Another silence followed. Finally, Ethan said he had known the truth would eventually come out. He kept telling himself that the company would become successful before that happened. If he earned enough, he believed he could repay me and reveal everything as proof that his choices had worked. He said each new lie was supposed to buy him a little more time. Anger rose through me so quickly that I leaned forward before I could stop myself. "You bought time with my life," I said. Helen gently asked me to let her continue. Then she turned back to Ethan and asked whether fear of failure justified deceiving me for 3 years. He said no. She asked whether he understood that every transfer had been obtained under false pretenses. This time he answered clearly, "Yes." Marcus opened his folder. Our proposal required Ethan to repay $55,000 over 10 years. He would sell the equipment purchased with my money and make an immediate payment of $18,000. He would sign a written acknowledgement that the funds had been obtained through intentional deception. If he missed 3 consecutive payments, I could return to court and provide the full evidence file to prosecutors. Marcus slid copies across the table. Ethan read the first page and went pale. His lawyer requested a private break. Helen allowed 15 minutes. In the hallway, Marcus told me not to mistake Ethan's silence for remorse. The evidence had forced him to stop performing, but negotiation was where he would try to escape consequences. Through the glass wall, I could see Ethan arguing with his lawyer.
For once, he was no longer controlling the room. The 15-minute break stretched into nearly half an hour. When Helen called us back, Ethan's lawyer returned with a new offer: $30,000 total, no written admission, and no immediate sale of equipment. Marcus rejected it. He placed the university withdrawal letter on the table, followed by Noah's records and the photographs Ethan had sent me. One showed him outside a courthouse in a suit. He claimed it was taken after a student competition. Noah's calendar proved he had been there to meet a nightclub owner. Marcus spoke without raising his voice. If this proceeds to trial, we will establish a 3-year pattern of deliberate deception. We will also refer the intercepted mail and false documents for criminal review. Ethan's lawyer asked for another private consultation. For the next 2 hours, the offers moved slowly. $35,000, $40,000 without admission, $45,000 with reduced monthly payments. Each proposal tried to remove the words fraud and deception. I understood why. Money could be explained away as a family dispute. A written admission could not. Marcus kept returning to our strongest point. Ethan had not merely spent money irresponsibly. He had created false circumstances to obtain it. Helen eventually separated us into different rooms. I sat beside Marcus in a small office with no windows. My head hurt. I asked whether we should accept less just to finish. Marcus shook his head. "You came here for accountability," he said. "Do not trade it away because you are tired." 20 minutes later, Helen returned with Ethan's final proposal. He would pay $42,000 over 8 years in monthly installments. He would sell most of the sound and lighting equipment and make an immediate payment of $16,000. He would sign a statement acknowledging that he obtained funds through repeated false representations about his education and living expenses. If he missed 3 consecutive payments, the remaining balance would become due, and I could pursue civil or criminal remedies using the preserved evidence. He would complete a year of financial counseling. Ethan would have no direct contact with me unless I initiated it. Marcus read every sentence twice. He strengthened the missed payment clause and added that Ethan could not ask others to contact me for him. Then he looked at me. "It is not everything," he said, "but it is enforceable." I knew I would never recover the full amount. The cabin was gone, the retirement growth was gone, the years could not be returned. Still, the agreement would force Ethan to face what he had done each month for 8 years. I said yes. Helen brought us back in. Ethan looked exhausted. A black pen waited next to the agreement in front of him. When Helen asked whether he understood the terms, he nodded. She made him answer aloud. "Yes, I understand." Then she asked whether he was signing voluntarily. Ethan glanced at me for the first time in hours. "Yes," he said again.
Helen signed as mediator, and both lawyers added their names as witnesses. The agreement would be filed with the court before the end of the day. I picked up the pen last. My signature trembled across the line, but when I set the pen down, I felt something inside me settle. The case was no longer a threat, a possibility, or another argument Ethan could twist. It was an official record. Ethan had admitted what he did. He had agreed to repay part of what he took. For the first time in 3 years, the rules were not his to invent. Outside the building, the afternoon sun reflected off the river. Marcus walked beside me toward the parking garage. He said family fraud settlements rarely restored everything because the money was usually gone before the truth emerged. Still, he added, you achieved more than most people do. You created consequences. I thanked him, but the word consequences felt small compared with the years Ethan had taken from me. 2 weeks later, I checked my bank account before work. A deposit of $16,000 was waiting. The reference line read, Equipment Liquidation. I stared at the screen until it blurred. Part of me had expected another excuse, another delay, or another story about why the equipment could not be sold. Instead, the money was there. I transferred it into a new retirement account Laura had helped me open at another bank. Ethan did not know the account existed. He would never have access to it, appear on its paperwork, or receive information about its balance. Laura called that afternoon. She congratulated me, then reminded me that the payment was not a gift, it was restitution. At our next meeting, she created a recovery plan based on my salary, the settlement payments, and one additional weekend shift each month. The projections were still painful. I would not retire at 63 as planned, but if I followed the plan, I could leave full-time work by 70 instead of working indefinitely. For the first time, the numbers looked difficult rather than impossible. The first monthly payment of $438 arrived on schedule. I sat at my kitchen table looking at the transaction. Relief came first, followed by sadness so heavy that I had to put the phone down. This was what remained of my relationship with my son, an automatic bank transfer enforced by a legal agreement. I told Miriam about it. She said grief and relief could exist together. Receiving the money did not erase the betrayal, and missing the son I believed I had did not require me to invite the real Ethan back into my life. I reduced my extra shifts at the clinic. For years, I had worked almost every available weekend. Now I limited myself to one. The first Saturday I stayed home, I slept until 10. When I woke, sunlight filled the apartment, and for several minutes I felt guilty for resting. Then I remembered there was nobody left to impress with my suffering. I made coffee, opened the window, and sat. For once, my time belonged to me.
3 months after mediation, my supervisor called me into her office. She had noticed that I was more focused and less exhausted. A charge nurse position had opened with higher pay. I accepted. The raise was modest, but Laura showed me how much it could change my recovery plan. With Ethan's payments, it could move retirement closer. Denise brought dinner to celebrate. While we ate, she suggested that I begin looking at property again. The idea made my stomach turn. Selling the cabin had been one of the worst decisions of my life. Even though I had done it for what I believed was a good reason, I told her I was not ready to risk another major purchase. "You do not have to buy tomorrow," she said. "Just remember, you are allowed to build something again." During lunch breaks, I browsed small condos in your colleges and hospitals. I studied mortgage rates, taxes, repairs, and rental income. This time, I saved every calculation and refused to rely on hope. I created a folder called My Future. Nobody else had access. 4 months after the settlement, Marcus forwarded a letter from Ethan. He could not contact me directly. Ethan wrote that he wanted to apologize fully. He said counseling had forced him to see how often he treated people as tools. He asked for one phone call and promised not to request money or forgiveness. I read the letter twice. Some sentences sounded sincere, others sounded designed to produce sympathy. I could no longer tell the difference, and that frightened me more than anger did. I called Marcus and said I was not ready. He replied that I did not owe Ethan access simply because he had learned to ask permission. Miriam agreed. During therapy, she asked whether refusing contact felt like punishment or protection. Protection, I said. I did not hesitate. Months earlier, I would have explained why Ethan needed me and why saying no felt cruel. Now I understood that love without boundaries had nearly destroyed me. At Miriam's suggestion, I attended a support group for parents harmed financially by adult children. The meeting took place in a community center basement. 8 chairs formed a circle. I almost left before it began. Patricia described losing her house after her daughter opened credit cards in her name. Another parent had funded a son's imaginary restaurant. A father had borrowed against his pension because his child claimed to need cancer treatment that never existed. When it was my turn, I told them about law school. Nobody looked shocked. They nodded when I mentioned the false photographs, intercepted letters, and the way Ethan changed from tears to threats when I resisted. For the first time, I did not feel foolish. I felt understood. The group leader said people like Ethan depend on trust and silence. Trust gives them access. Silence protects them after the truth appears. Speaking aloud broke that silence. I left carrying the same history, but it no longer felt like a secret I had to hide.
6 months into the repayment plan, Ethan's payment did not appear on the due date. My stomach dropped. By noon, I had checked the account 9 times. By evening, I was imagining court hearings and another legal battle. I called Marcus before I could talk myself into contacting Ethan directly. Marcus reminded me that the agreement allowed action only after 3 consecutive missed payments. One late transfer did not erase the protections we had built. "Do nothing yet," he said. "Let the process work." 3 days later, the payment arrived. Marcus forwarded a message from Ethan's lawyer explaining that a repair on the Mercedes had delayed the transfer. Ethan apologized and promised payments would be automatic. The excuse annoyed me. He was still leasing a car for an image he could no longer afford, but the money had arrived, and I had not broken the no-contact rule. That felt like progress. A month later, Denise convinced me to take a weekend trip with her to a town in Lake Michigan. We rented a modest room near the water, walked along the beach, and ate dinner where nobody knew anything about Ethan. It was my first vacation in nearly 5 years. At first, I kept calculating what everything cost. Hotel, meals, parking, coffee. Every purchase felt irresponsible. Denise took the receipt from my hand and said, "You are allowed to enjoy money that belongs to you." The sentence stayed with me. For years, every dollar had been measured against Ethan's needs. Even after the truth, I still treated my own comfort like a betrayal. On the second morning, we sat on a bench facing the lake. Denise asked what I wanted my life to look like if Ethan never returned to it. I had no answer. So much of my identity had been built around being his mother. Without that role, I felt both empty and strangely free. I told Denise I wanted a home with enough space for guests. I wanted one short trip each year. I wanted to retire with dignity and stop feeling afraid whenever my phone rang. Then build that, she said. When we returned, I met with Laura and showed her the condo listings I had saved. She reviewed my calculations and said one property might be realistic within 18 months if I kept saving. She suggested an emergency fund before any down payment. No borrowed money, no emotional decisions, no involving family. I agreed with every condition. At work, the charge nurse role demanded more confidence than I expected. I assigned shifts, resolved disputes, and made decisions younger nurses questioned. Before, conflict frightened me. I had spent years avoiding Ethan's disappointment. Now I discovered I could remain calm while someone was upset with me. One afternoon, a nurse challenged a scheduling decision in front of the team. My hands shook, but I explained the policy and held my position. She disagreed. Nothing terrible happened. That evening, I realized boundaries were changing more than my finances. They were teaching me how to live.
8 months after the settlement, Laura reviewed my accounts again. She compared the balance with the plan we created after mediation. Between Ethan's payments, my raise, and the expenses I had cut, I had saved nearly $11,000 toward a future property. For the first time, I was ahead of schedule. Laura showed me listings for small condos. Some needed repairs, but the numbers worked. If I saved for another year, I could afford a down payment without touching my emergency fund. The possibility no longer felt reckless. It felt earned. I began studying listings. I compared taxes, insurance, repair costs, and expected rent. I built spreadsheets for every property and removed anything that depended on unrealistic appreciation. Hope was no longer enough. I wanted proof. One morning, an email arrived from Noah with the subject line, "Starting over." He wrote that he had opened a smaller event company with 2 new partners. They booked weddings and charity dinners instead of chasing celebrity connections. The work was less glamorous, but it paid consistently. Noah thanked me for not naming him in the lawsuit. He said discovering where Ethan's money came from had changed how he chose partners. He attached a photograph of their office, a narrow room above a bakery with 2 desks. It looked ordinary. It also looked real. I replied with a brief congratulations and archived the message. His future was not mine to manage. During my next appointment, Miriam asked how often I thought about Ethan. I realized entire days passed without him entering my mind. Months earlier, I replayed every lie while driving, eating, and trying to sleep. Now my attention belonged to work, finances, and friends. We agreed to move from weekly sessions to every other week. Miriam called it progress. I called it breathing room. The next Saturday, Denise picked me up before breakfast. She had found a condo near Loyola University that she insisted I see. The building was old. Inside, the kitchen had yellow cabinets, worn counters, and outdated appliances. The bathroom needed tile work, and one bedroom had a cracked window. But the unit was bright, near transit, and priced low enough to leave room for repairs. I walked through it twice with a notebook. Denise pointed out problems. I estimated costs. The agent tried to sell me a dream, but I kept asking for documents, association records, repair history, taxes, and rental restrictions. Standing in that outdated kitchen, I noticed I was not afraid. I was not the woman who had sold her security to finance a lie. I was someone who could examine risk, say no, and walk away. The condo was not right for me, but leaving did not feel like failure. It felt like a decision. On the drive home, Denise smiled and said, "You did not fall in love with the first place. I learned what that costs," I answered. That evening, Ethan's payment arrived automatically. I did not notice until the next morning. I knew that was progress.
2 years after mediation, Marcus forwarded another letter from Ethan. This time, Ethan did not ask to call. He wrote that he had finished counseling and now worked for a logistics company outside Chicago. The event business was gone. The Mercedes had been returned. He rented a small apartment with one roommate. He said he finally understood that what he stole was not limited to money. He had taken years of my labor, my safety, and my ability to believe him. I read it 3 times, searching for pressure hidden between the lines. There was no request for forgiveness, no emergency, and no promise of future success. He only said he hoped that one day I might believe he regretted what he had done. I placed the letter inside the folder with the settlement agreement. I did not reply. Miriam asked how the letter made me feel. I told her the honesty seemed real, but I had trusted Ethan's sincerity before. Part of me wanted to recognize the change. Another part feared that hope would become the door through which he entered my life again. Miriam said I could acknowledge improvement without offering access. Trust is not a reward for one good letter, she said. It is built through consistent action over time. Ethan had made every payment for 2 years and respected the no-contact agreement. Those facts mattered. They did not erase the past. A few months later, I made an offer on a condo in Rogers Park. It had hardwood floors and a narrow kitchen, but the building's finances were stable and rental demand was strong. Laura reviewed every number. Denise attended the inspection. I kept money for repairs and refused to raise my offer when another buyer appeared. They withdrew. On closing day, I signed the papers slowly. The property would not replace the cabin I had sold, but it belonged to me, purchased with my earnings and protected by clear decisions. Denise took me to dinner, we raised our glasses, and she said I had rebuilt more than an investment. The first tenants were a graduate student and her husband. Their rent covered the mortgage, taxes, and maintenance. Laura's projections showed I could retire at 69. It was later than planned, but no longer frightening. I would have rental income, savings, and 0 debt. At work, I began mentoring a nurse named Sophie. She often sent money to her younger brother, who claimed he was studying culinary arts in Boston. One evening, she mentioned that he never allowed her to visit because his schedule was too demanding. The sentence made my chest tighten. I told Sophie a shortened version of my story. I said supporting someone you love can be beautiful, but support without verification can become permission for abuse. I urged her to confirm enrollment, pay institutions directly, and protect her savings. The next week, she thanked me. Her brother was enrolled, but he had exaggerated his expenses. She changed the arrangement. Some lessons could be passed on before they destroyed a life.
4 years passed with Ethan's payments arriving almost every month on time. I no longer checked the account anxiously. Laura had arranged automatic transfers, so the money moved directly into retirement savings. I trained myself to see each deposit as restitution, not support from my son. That distinction mattered. He was not helping me rebuild. He was returning a fraction of what he had taken. One afternoon, Marcus called while I was leaving work. Ethan's lawyer wanted to confirm the final year of the repayment schedule and ensure every transfer had been recorded. Marcus sounded surprised. Ethan had paid more than $36,000 of the agreed amount. Only 2 payments had been late. He had completed financial counseling and had not tried to contact me outside the legal process. After the call, I sat in my car. For the first time, I felt something other than anger when I thought about Ethan. It was not forgiveness. It was a reluctant respect for the fact that he was finally doing what he had promised. During my next session, I told Miriam that admitting this felt dangerous, as though recognizing his progress might weaken my boundaries. She shook her head. "You can acknowledge responsible behavior without rewriting the past," she said. "Growth does not cancel harm, and caution does not cancel compassion." Ethan's consistency did not restore trust, but pretending it meant nothing would also be dishonest. Meanwhile, the condo was performing better than expected. My tenants renewed their lease, and the rent increased enough to create a profit after expenses. I saved every dollar. A year later, I used part of that income and my emergency fund to purchase a second property, a modest 1-bedroom unit near a hospital complex. It needed paint, flooring, and new cabinets, but the building was well managed. Denise helped me choose materials.
Laura reviewed the financing. I hired licensed workers and refused shortcuts that could create problems later. When the renovation was finished, I stood alone in the empty living room. Sunlight crossed the new floor. There were no lies hidden in the paperwork and no promises from someone asking me to trust them. Everything had been checked. Everything belonged to me. The unit rented within 3 weeks to a respiratory therapist who worked night shifts. Her payments covered the mortgage and left enough for maintenance. At my next financial review, Laura turned her monitor toward me with a smile. 2 rental properties were producing steady income. My retirement account had passed $58,000. I carried no consumer debt, and my emergency fund could cover 6 months of expenses. If I maintained the plan, I could retire at 68. The number felt miraculous, not because it restored the future I had lost, but because I had built a different one with clearer eyes. That evening, I opened the folder containing Ethan's letters. I read the newest one again. Then, for the first time, I considered answering.
I did not answer immediately. For weeks, the idea remained in the back of my mind. Sometimes I imagined writing a long letter that listed every wound in exact detail. Other times I considered sending only one sentence. I see that you are keeping your agreement. Miriam suggested I decide what purpose a response would serve. If I wrote because I wanted Ethan to remove my pain, I would be disappointed. If I wrote because I wanted to control whether he changed, I would be returning to an old pattern. But if I wrote simply to state my truth and define the conditions of any future contact, then the decision could belong to me. I waited another month. Then I wrote 3 paragraphs. I acknowledged that he had followed the settlement and completed counseling. I said those actions mattered, but they did not restore the trust destroyed by years of deception. Finally, I explained that I was not ready for a relationship, though I might consider a supervised conversation in the future if his responsible behavior continued. I sent the letter through Marcus. Ethan replied 2 weeks later. His response contained no excuses. He thanked me for answering and said he understood that I owed him nothing. He would continue making payments and would respect whatever distance I needed. I placed the reply in the same folder. For once, I did not spend hours analyzing every word. 5 years after the mediation, Laura and I met from my financial review. She projected my accounts onto the screen and smiled before saying anything. The first condo was fully occupied and producing income. The second had increased in value after the renovation. My retirement investments had recovered steadily, helped by my salary, settlement deposits, and years of disciplined contributions. I had rebuilt roughly 60% of what Ethan's deception had cost me directly. The number did not include the cabin or all the lost growth, but it was enough. Laura said I could stop working extra weekends. If I remained charge nurse for 3 more years, I could retire at 68 with a modest but secure income. I looked at the projections and felt proud. Not grateful to Ethan, proud of myself. The recovery had come from boundaries, careful planning, support from people who told me the truth, and thousands of small decisions made when giving up would have been easier. That weekend, Denise and I returned to the same lake pound we had visited after the settlement. This time, I booked the room without calculating whether I deserved it. We walked along the water at sunset. Denise asked whether I believed I would ever see Ethan again. I said maybe. The answer no longer frightened me. Seeing him would not mean pretending the past had disappeared. Refusing would not mean I was bitter. I could choose based on who he consistently proved himself to be, not on guilt, fear, or the memory of the child he once was. A few months later, Marcus called with an update. Only 6 payments remained.
6 remaining payments sounded insignificant compared with the years behind us, yet the numbers stayed in my mind. Marcus said Ethan had asked whether, after the final transfer, the no-contact condition could be reviewed. He did not demand anything. He only wanted to know whether I might consider meeting in a public place with Marcus present. I told him I needed time. Before, I would have answered immediately, afraid hesitation might drive Ethan away. Now I understood that urgency had always been one of his tools. Real change could survive waiting. I discussed it with Miriam, Denise, and Laura. Laura focused on practical concerns. The settlement was nearly complete, my accounts were protected, and Ethan had no access to my property or financial information. Denise supported either choice, but reminded me curiosity was not trust. Miriam asked what I feared most. That I will see the little boy I remember, I said, and forget the man he became. She nodded. Then do not meet the boy in your memory. Meet the adult in front of you. I agreed to one conversation after the final payment cleared. The last 6 months passed quietly. Ethan paid every installment on schedule. Marcus sent confirmations, but I rarely opened them immediately. My life had become larger than the agreement. I reduced my hours at the clinic. I reviewed repairs with a tenant. I joined Denise for a trip to New Orleans where we listened to live music without calculating whether enjoyment was irresponsible. On the first morning of retirement planning, Laura handed me a folder labeled AGE 68. Inside was a 3-year work schedule, rental projections, healthcare costs, and a conservative withdrawal plan. For the first time, retirement looked like a date instead of a distant hope. The final payment arrived on a Thursday morning. There was no message, no apology attached to the transfer, just $438 deposited into the account and a reference number. Marcus called later. The agreement is satisfied, he said. Every required payment has been made. I thanked him and sat quietly after the call ended. I expected triumph. Instead, I felt calm. The money Ethan repaid could not restore what he took, but the end of the agreement proved something I had once believed impossible. Consequences could last longer than manipulation. A week later, I met Ethan at a quiet restaurant near Grant Park. Marcus sat nearby, close enough to step in. Denise waited in a cafe across the street. Ethan arrived early. He looked older, thinner, and less polished than I remembered. There was no expensive car outside, no designer jacket, no portfolio filled with projections. He stood when I approached, but did not try to hug me. "Thank you for coming," he said. I sat across from him. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan placed a folded sheet of paper on the table. He said it was not a request. It was a record of what he believed he owed me beyond the settlement.
The cabin, the retirement growth, the years I had worked through pain, the meals I skipped, the trust he destroyed. He wrote that finishing the payments did not erase his debt. I folded the page. I studied his handwriting and remembered how easily I once believed every promise. This time, I kept enough distance to judge it. Ethan did not cry or ask for forgiveness. Counseling had taught him that remorse was not a performance meant to make me comfortable. It was accepting that I might never want him in my life again. He had kept the logistics job, paid his debts, and started saving. He no longer worked in entertainment. He loved music, but no longer believed passion excused dishonesty. When he finished, I told him the truth. I was glad he had honored the agreement. I believed he had changed. But I could not promise a normal relationship, and he would never access my finances again. Ethan nodded. I understand. For the first time, I thought he might. We spoke for 40 minutes. There was no embrace, instant forgiveness, or perfect ending. Before leaving, he asked if he could write every few months. I agreed, with one condition: no requests, emergencies, or pressure. Outside, Denise waited beside her car. I met the man he is, now, I said. I'm still deciding whether I want to know him. She hugged me, and we drove home. Over the next year, Ethan sent 4 letters. They were ordinary. He wrote about work, a cooking class, and volunteering at legal aid. He never asked for money. I answered twice. That was enough. At 68, I retired from full-time nursing. My coworkers held a party. Sophie said I had taught younger nurses to care for others without abandoning themselves. I cried. My 2 rental properties provided steady income. My retirement account was smaller than it should have been, but secure. I could pay my bills, travel sometimes, and sleep without fearing one emergency would destroy everything. The life I built was not the life I planned. It was mine, anyway. Sometimes I passed the pharmacy where I learned about Ethan's company. I remember the woman I was that day, tired, proud, and certain sacrifice proved love. I no longer believe that. Love without truth becomes permission. Support without boundaries becomes access. Forgiveness without accountability invites harm to continue. Ethan took years from me, but not the rest of my life. I rebuilt my future with legal papers, therapy, spreadsheets, hard conversations, and friends who refused to let me blame myself. I learned that saying no can be an act of love, when saying yes helps someone destroy both of you. I do not know whether Ethan and I will become close again. Maybe we will exchange careful letters and share occasional lunches. Maybe trust will grow. Maybe it will not. Either outcome is acceptable. My peace no longer depends on what he becomes, it depends on what I protect. And after everything, that is the one thing nobody will ever take from me again.